Howdy, I'm Jammer. So before we begin, you'll probably hear my neighbor's dog in the background of this video at some point. Like, the dog has been barking consistently for like the last hour, which means I've been kind of pacing back and forth, kind of like doing stuff around the house, cleaning, what have you, basically waiting for the dog to stop, and it hasn't. And I've only got so much time to do this video. So if you hear barking, that's what it is. Also, just a reminder, there is a Patreon account for this channel now. It's in the description section below in my link tree. It's $1 a month. That's right, for $1 a month, or even just a one-time donation of $1, you can help this channel, and trust me, every little bit helps. It helps me afford food, and rent, and of course, comics. Oh, crud, I did the reveal too early. Oh well. But yes, please, if you got a few pennies you don't mind losing this month, hey, throw a couple in my hat. I'll be immensely appreciative. Now, at the time of this recording, it is September 9th, 2021, at, I don't have a watch, it doesn't matter. The point is, it's in the evening, and I've come to the end of the day, and I was like, hey, you know what? I'm going to finally sit down and do this video that I've been wanting to do. But there was also something that I also wanted to bring up, which was that as of this taping, I have recently begun watching Anita Sarkeesian's video, Tropes versus Video Games. Now, if you have never heard of that before, you probably don't know words like Gamergate, what have you. But if you do know who she is and what Tropes versus Video Games is, well, I'm going to post a link in the description section below because it's an interesting video. You know, contrary to popular belief, there are a few cisgender white men out there who play video games regularly and watch Rick and Morty who are not complete pieces of shit. I mean, most of us are. Let's be real. The stereotype exists for a reason. But definitely check it out. Now, what does this have to do with comics? Well, at first, nothing. But I started watching this series lately. And, of course, one of the main focuses of her first video is the sort of damsel in distress trope, which has really been consistent through a lot of video games all across the world. And, of course, the series that she kind of places her or centers her focus on is probably one of my favorite video game franchises of all time, Legend of Zelda. For the record, I agree with just about everything she says in the video. I love Zelda, Legend of Zelda, and I can desire a great deal to continue playing Legend of Zelda, but she has a lot of good criticisms about the medium. Now again, looking at comics, it seemed a great time to sort of bring up a book that I recently came into possession of, which is Legend of Zelda, A Link to the Past, story and art by Shotaro Ishinomori. I guarantee you, as always, my East Texas twang and my speech impediment are going to butcher that name endlessly, so please, 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 please forgive me. But yes, this manga, you can't really call it a traditional manga. It's more of just really a sort of graphic novel, and really, it's kind of a bound trade, but I'll get into that in a second. But this popped up at my local comic book shop, Ground Zero Comics. I saw it, and as somebody who basically spent their entire childhood playing the Super Nintendo game, Legend of Zelda, A Link to the Past, I went, oh wow, I had no idea they actually made that. So I picked it up and I read it, and by the end of it, I liked it. I can hear the dog now. You probably can now too. But I liked the book, and I thought, you know, I kind of want to do that for my video series, because I've done Super Mario Adventures, I've done Kirby Manga Mania, and nobody really watched those videos. But you know what? Life is short, and I'm going to do what I want to do. And upon finishing this book, after thinking, wow, that was dramatically different than the video game, it was also, again, another opportunity to reflect on the fact of they actually did some really interesting things with the medium. And so I was like, hey, if only I had a YouTube channel where I talked about the medium of comics. Then 4 or 5 days passed, and I went, aha, I think I know somebody who does. And then 3 or 4 weeks passed, and then here I am making the video because I remembered at some point. But this has been a very unnecessarily long introduction, so let's hop into Legend of Zelda, A Link to the Past, and talk about, well, why exactly am I dedicating my time and energy and your time and energy to a video game? Well, no, a graphic novel based off of a video game. Whew. Okay, So, a while back in 2019, and oh my god, 2019 was 2 years ago. I can't deal, y'all. That's just, no, can't do it, can't think of it. Anyway, back in 2019, when I was first starting this video series, not exactly expecting that I would have close to about 75 videos or more under my belt, I did a review of this book here, Mad Max Fury Road by George Miller. It was a tie-in graphic novel, a limited run of series put out by Vertigo. That's how old this book actually is, because Vertigo is no longer in existence. It's now Black Label, which is its own sort of thing. Anyway, Wikipedia, it's kind of a convoluted mess. But nevertheless, this book came out as a kind of tie-in to the movie Mad Max Fury Road, which was chef's kiss, wonderful. I cannot say enough wonderful things about that movie. But when I did the review of this book, I really wanted to tackle it not so much just as a book in and of itself, which is unfortunate because this is actually a pretty interesting graphic novel, but I wanted to use it as a way to bring up the topic of a kind of intermedia experience. Now, what exactly does that mean? Well, it's one of these sort of experiences that is becoming more and more common in today's media landscape. To wit, at the time of this recording, Amazon Prime has already put out commercials for their new Wheel of Time series. Now, what is the Wheel of Time? I don't know the full story behind it. Honestly, I'm sure there's somebody out there, probably a neckbeard, who's going to explain to me the complex history of the Wheel of Time series and why it's brilliant and astounding and wonderful, and I'll believe them. But for the time being, what's important is it's a fantasy series, fantasy science fiction novel series. They're doing a streaming movie, God, I'm not that old. They're doing a new streaming series on Amazon Prime based upon those novels, which means there's going to be a ton of people who will watch the Amazon series and then move over to the books. It's really not that uncommon. In fact, that's a pretty common multimedia experience, is seeing a movie, a film, or a television show and then going to the book, or vice versa. There will be fans who experience the book first and will then go over to the series. Then there will be some people who will begin the series and try the books and then realize, oh my god, the Wheel of Time series is like 12 books, each of whom is like almost 1,000 pages long. Nah, I'm out. I'll go binge watch Stranger Things for the 3rd, 14th, 20th time in a row. But what's important here, again, is that, especially when we talk about media and media studies, is people, for the most part, experience media sometimes in one format, such as a prose novel. They may experience it as a TV show or a movie, but sometimes there are individuals who are so dedicated to a kind of landscape or creative landscape that they try different types. To wit, I watch Mad Max Fury Road, and then I go out and I read a comic book based off of Mad Max Fury Road. What does this have to do with Legend of Zelda? Well, the very fact that this book exists is a testament to the notion of a multimedia experience. The Legend of Zelda is a franchise that is literally a quarter of a century old at this point. I think the 25th anniversary actually had come up recently, if not the 30th anniversary. The point is, The Legend of Zelda, as a franchise, as an intellectual property, as a creative universe, has existed for well over at least 2 decades, which means that you have an entire generation which has been raised up on those video games. So there's a significant number of people who will know the names Zelda, Link, or at least, honestly, most people will just know the name Zelda. Maybe they'll also know Ganondorf because they played Smash at some point. Smash Brothers, not just Smash, that's a different thing. Google it. But make sure you go through Urban Dictionary first. Whatever the case, if we look at The Legend of Zelda, A Link to the Past, we have to understand that this book is, in and of itself, part of a multimedia experience, because people who are approaching this book almost certainly will have approached it because they played The Legend of Zelda, A Link to the Past, or some version of, or at least one of the Zelda games at some point. You're reading this book probably because you've played a Zelda game and you want to explore that universe, those characters, that mythos in some other media experience. Now, why am I taking a good solid 5 minutes to sit down and talk about this before we even hop into the book? Well, because again, this channel is dedicated again to the form of comics and the experience of the form of comics rather than just the narrative itself. So when we're looking at something like a video game, a media type which is very action driven, or at least typically action driven, the media experience is I hold a controller in my hands for the most part, I press buttons, I move joysticks, and it's because of these physical actions that actions are taking place on the screen in front of me. That creates a specific type of experience. And for that, honestly, you'll have to find a dozen other YouTubers who are going to get into the actual psychology of video games, the actual physiology of the video game experience, what have you. There's a lot to tackle there, and I'm not even going to begin to try to do that here. What I'm trying to suggest, however, is that we approach comics so differently than when we approach video games. Because in a video game environment, we are able to observe characters moving. We're able to observe and control character actions. We physically see characters moving about or reacting to their environment. Comics, on the other hand, again, relies on the notion of closure through the execution of images contained in panels, sometimes without panels, of course. But again, the creator or the reader at this moment acts as a kind of creator by moving from the action sequence of this ice fortress breaking down to suddenly the transportation to Link on top of this giant turtle-shaped rock. We don't observe Link walking all the way to that turtle-shaped rock, whereas in a video game, we would. It's important to at least consider this as we're tackling this book, to remember that we, the reader, are creating these moments in our mind, which is such a dramatically different experience than when we play a video game. So I just wanted to take a few minutes to sort of remind the reader again that when we're looking at this book, we're not just looking at it just as a comic book. We also have to consider that this medium is different than the medium that Link and Zelda have typically embodied in most of the reader's minds beforehand. And it's worth our time and energy to remember that playing a video game is such a dramatically different experience than reading a comic. At first it may not seem that way, partly because video games and comics are two media that, for the most part, have been largely ignored by lots of, art critics and just general intellectuals at all. It's been so wrapped up in capitalism that nobody's really bothered to think of them as art. Well, to my last breath, video games are art, comics are art, so let's get now really into Legend of Zelda: A Link to the Past and figure out what exactly this book is trying to do in terms of contributing to the medium as a whole. I noticed at some point during that segment just a second ago that, there's a lot of my desk and very little of me, so I'm trying to give myself just a little bit more working room. Okay, so, again, Legend of Zelda: A Link to the Past, put out by Shotaro Ishinomori. Told you I would mess that up. And again, this is put out by Viz Media, their group, they're a publishing firm that handles a lot of manga franchises. Now, this book is predominantly composed of comics that came out, well, if you look here on the very back of the book, apart from staring at this just gorgeous art, it's so beautiful, it actually provides you with a little bit of background about what these comics are. I'll just read them out loud. The Legend of Zelda: A Link to the Past is renowned artist Shotaro Ishinomori's adaptation of the beloved classic internationally best-selling video game of the same name, originally released for Nintendo's Super Entertainment System. Okay, fair enough. It's also important to note in the very back of the book, again, more gorgeous art, it provides us a really interesting about the author segment, as well as a little bit about the comics itself. And that I will also read. The comics in this book were originally serialized in Nintendo Power magazine. The first 12 parts appeared January 1992, volume 32, and the series ran through December 1992, volume 43. While the story loosely follows the plot of Super Entertainment System game, The Legend of Zelda: A Link to the Past, some new twists and characters were added to preserve the element of surprise and add to the dramatic flow. So it's important to recognize this book is effectively a kind of bound trade, similar to this collection here of Ice Cream Man Volume 1, which, great book, I really want to talk about it at some point in the future. But the point is that Ice Cream Man Volume 1 is a collection of single-issue comics, the way, we've tackled a couple times. You have a single issue of, say, Alien 3, number 2, and then eventually it gets collected into one big collection of comics, say, like Ice Cream Man Volume 1. Legend of Zelda: A Link to the Past is a little different, however, because these comics, one, appeared to be very episodic in their narrative tone, and then two, they were largely designed to be more kind of advertisement for the game itself. Like it shows there were some alterations and adjustments. I'm going to say some alteration and adjustments. This book is dramatically different than the game itself. Saying that as somebody who spent most of, again, his childhood playing said game, they take a lot of new directions with this book and this landscape. But more importantly is the fact that this would appear segmentally. Segmentally? Is that a word? We're going to do it. The better word is serially. Think sort of along the lines of a novel by Charles Dickens. When, say, Oliver Twist or Great Expectations was coming out, you would get a certain number of chapters put out in a literary magazine that people would then receive, read, and then they would have to wait for the next month's issue to come in before they could figure out what happened. Legend of Zelda: A Link to the Past follows that format. It's very sort of... It's almost, I would say, traditionally literary in that perspective. But it's a unique perspective, again, because when we talk about Nintendo comics, they are so wrapped up in video games and video game franchises that sometimes their comics, it's easy to think of them as just empty advertising spaces. To be like, oh, look, you like this character? You like Legend of Zelda? Well, we've got a Legend of Zelda on the Super Nintendo that you may enjoy. But in this book's defense, one of the things that was really surprising was how much play actually went into the form itself. If we look at one of the early passages in the book, I'm just going to do the sort of wide-angle shot of the pages, but then if we take just a look at this one here, we have a kind of traditional page layout. We've got 1, 2, 3, 4 panels in total, most of them just rectangular in structure. But again, if you look at the level of artistry that's going into it, one, this is a very much a manga book. It's very much steeped in the tradition of Eastern comics, which means if you've ever read anything like Astro Boy or Akira, it's very much that following that visual style. Manga, for the most part, doesn't really try, or manga artists, for the most part, typically follow a sort of uniform visual style. There's some exceptions that come up here and there, but you can clearly tell that Ishinomori, again, I'm just going to butcher that name endlessly, y'all. I'm really sorry, but I am. But you can see the level of detail and attention that he's paying into actually setting up these shots. If you look at this frame here of the Master Sword, while Link is being told about it, you can just look at the way the Master Sword kind of completely dominates the left hand, or probably more right-hand side of the page, while we're receiving the actual contents of what the Master Sword is. If you look at these light beams that are coming down, you effectively have one long panel here, followed by 3 panels. These 3 panels here are being enveloped by the kind of angelic, almost dare I say, holy light that is spilling down onto the Master Sword itself. Now, again, the colorist is doing a lot of great work here, and Ishinomori, Ishinomori, yeah, I got it right that time. Ishinomori is definitely allowing his, just detailed pencil work. And my God, that cottage is gorgeous, isn't it? Look at the roof, look at the stonework. It's just gorgeous. But he's allowing this strange L-shaped panel to completely envelop the rest of the content because our eyes are supposed to be drawn to the sword. The sword envelops us in terms of the narrative because that's what Link is working towards. He has to get the sword so he can defeat the evil wizard, so that he can defeat Ganon, so that he can save Hyrule and get the girl. Except he doesn't, but, spoilers. Anyway, if we take another passage, we have a really, really gorgeous shot where at one point we see Link fighting this giant worm out in the desert. Now, anybody who played the second dungeon knows that you actually fought 3 giant worms, not 1. But again, they're changing aspects of the story. But you'll note right off the bat that we get kind of this interesting layout. Because on the one hand, the last previous page, we got just this gorgeous spread of Link attacking the worm, and it ends with him getting into the sacred pendant that's going to allow him the powers in order to defeat the worm. And you note down here in the corner, to be continued. So right off the bat, this is how this particular page spread ended, with just this gorgeous, sumptuous arrangement that really conveys so much action and energy. The very next page continues that energy. One, by doing an almost 2-page spread to show the sheer immensity and physical strength of the worm, but then also as well, we have this side. It's a big clunky book, so please forgive me, but you'll see here we have these 3 panels that begin the page, and the reader, first of all, is thrown not into a regular rectangular panel, but a kind of quasi-diagonal one. There's some weird energy going on, coupled by the sort of visual language of these lines moving forward. We can feel Link charging towards this giant worm, and just as well in the worm itself, we have these this red and black, in which if you take the color away, you're still going to have these sort of energetic lines showing this energy that's sort of either coming out of the worm. You can have like the darkness, these dark shadows that are coming from the evil force against the red of sort of Link's positive energy coming in to murder it. Now, at the same time, you also have the nice execution of this growl, beautiful onomatopoeia. Link attacks the worm, again, more energetic lines, and then it pulls out into that almost 2-page spread to show just this moment of immensity of the creature that Link is fighting. Now, why is this important? Again, Legend of Zelda is an action-driven game. It's a fantasy game. You know, you're going to have monsters, and yes, the bad guy of this particular franchise is Ganon, a giant pig man. And yes, for the record, yeah, that's how they represented Ganon, which, believe it or not, is actually pretty fitting for what the game actually looked like. Like, I saw that and I'm like, yeah, actually, that's straight. That's perfect. But it's also important to note is that the presentation of Ganon is so visually interesting because, again, if you look at the setup for the previous page, we have this gorgeous fight scene. There's all this energy, these sort of angular panels that are sort of moving back and forth. There's so much energy before inevitably Ganon emerges up out of this gorgeous mist, sort of swallowing up the entire page. We feel dramatically his strength, his power, and then just the sheer threat of his existence by how much space is given to him. Now, also, it's important to note, it's also coupled by the fact that that was the end of that particular sequence of the comic. So you get the feeling that, one, Ganon is being given an entire page because he's the big bad guy. We've kind of been building up for this, so of course he's going to get his own page, and also he's going to get a whole page because we really want to hit him with that cliffhanger. But then as well, too, it's important to note that the sudden emergence of Ganon coming out and swallowing up the space is directly counterimposed to this series of harsh, cut panels. Again, and if you look at it, we don't even have a full page. There's lots of gaps that the reader then effectively kind of just has to fill. It's almost as if the whole world is splintering before Ganon then moves in and consumes it all. So this is what I meant. Oh, hey, Tommy. Tommy, say hello to the internet again. He says hello. If we look at this book as an example of comics working as an interesting medium, we see that while the narrative elements are definitely there, a lot of the real narrative work is accomplished by paying attention to the way that the energy conveyed by the structure. He left. He wanted to be the center of attention, but I'm sorry, y'all matter more right now. You can hate me all you want, but in my defense, I'm feeding him right after this. Anyway, again, just looking at this, we can see that by fracturing the panels thusly, it creates a sense of energy that is then sort of not subdued, but really complemented by a return to the rectangular panel. Now, another example that I wanted to bring out, if I can find the page in question, is that, again, what's really interesting to me about this book is that Ishinomori, yes, I got it right, 2 times. My master's in English. Get off my back. What's important here is that Ishinomori does so much play with panel layouts and panel arrangements in this book. And that's because far more often than not, he's telling a very dynamic, energetic story. But just as much, he knows how important it can be to just fill a space. And the two-page spread, coupled by this gorgeous text and onomatopoeia, it's something that you could possibly see in a superhero book. So in and of itself, it doesn't seem like it's terribly great. But again, we have to remember that this comic is appearing in Nintendo Power magazine. The people that are reading Nintendo Power are video gamers, or video game enthusiasts. These are not people that are going to be contributing or thinking heavily about the medium of comics and how panel arrangements or the use of the right text or the sort of iconography of style can contribute to the story that's being presented. Most readers are probably going to be like, is Link going to fight Ganon this week? And so I personally think it's really interesting the fact that he's willing to play so much with the medium and tell and create some of the most beautiful moments I've probably ever seen in a comic book. Again, especially when we talk about something like a Legend of Zelda game, we're talking about something that's very fantastical. It's a young man fighting skeletons. And, okay, sure, interesting, great. That, in and of itself, probably doesn't seem like it has a lot of capacity for depth. But, begging your pardon, I think that's a negative thought, or I think that's an unfair thought. Because again, if you look at the way these characters are being represented within the actual bodies of the panels themselves, there's so much subtlety moving forward in order to convey all this action and energy. And then the actual visual style itself should be noted. Because again, Link often comes across as very iconic in the story because in the video games, Link was very much a kind of everyman. Granted, if you weren't a white person like I was, you probably weren't able to imprint that much upon Link as a character. But what is important is, again, when we talk about his physical features, there's really not that much to it. Again, Ishinomori presents Link very iconically. There's enough detail and information in his physical form to convey masculinity, though, to be fair, a lot of people have pointed out that Link kind of sometimes skirts that line in terms of his outward presentation. Like, he can sort of, I don't want to say he can bounce back and forth on the gender binary, but you could definitely make the case for his androgyny. But that is another video. Somebody find that somewhere, send me a link to it, because I would love to watch it. But what's important here is that when we look at the visual style of Ishinomori in this book, it's very iconic. And that, again, is an important thing to focus on because it's a reminder that the reader is intended to imprint upon Link. We want to have the adventure that Link is on. If Link was an entirely different person, we may not be able to imprint as much upon him. But by making Link very much a cartoonish character in the vein of someone like Popeye, it allows the reader to sort of let go of their own ego, sort of become Link, and sort of just engage in the adventure itself. It may not seem as terribly important, but in my estimation, the seeming simplicity of Link is yet another way to allow the reader to sort of let go of their reality and just engage in the sheer fantasy that is Legend of Zelda: A Link to the Past. Looking at my clock right now, this video is a lot longer than I intended to. God, y'all really need to just play like a drinking game where every single time I say that you take a shot. You would probably be pissed off your ass by the end of it. But I spent a lot of time on this book because I really loved it, and because I spent most of the day thinking, I want to go home and make a video about Legend of Zelda. But truly, this book is stunningly gorgeous in the way that it uses panels, and the way that it uses its iconic artwork, and the way that it plays with the medium rather than just making a bare-bones story designed to sort of capitalize on the franchise itself. This book, while being very dramatically different than the original video game, manages to make a lot of interesting creative choices. And it's unfortunate that a lot of these Nintendo comics don't get a lot of credit because, honestly, sometimes they wind up being better than most of the comics that I actually read. So, let's do the last hurrah and then call it a day. Alright. Legend of Zelda: A Link to the Past by, one more time, y'all, Shotaro Ishinomori. I almost had 3 times. I almost had 3 times. 3 times. Numbers. Almost had it. Legend of Zelda: A Link to the Past. This book is really great. Like, I don't want to say something like it's almost better than it has right to be, because No, of course it has the right to be that. If any of these Nintendo comics videos that I've done so far have demonstrated anything, is that even though the Nintendo comics didn't typically get a lot of critical attention, and even though fans for the most part tended to be kind of apathetic about them, there's still a great wealth of artistry that actually went into these books. And even if you've never played Legend of Zelda: A Link to the Past, you'll probably enjoy this book because it's wacky and absurd and ridiculous. And Link talks. Yeah, I didn't mention that. Like, he actually talks. He doesn't just do the hi-ya and which is pretty much all he's ever done for the last 2 decades. Seriously, give him one line. One line, y'all. If Mario can say okie dokie, Link can say, all right. Anyway, when we're looking at this book, it's easy, I think, at first to look at this and being like, okay, this is just Nintendo trying to cash in on a really popular game. On the one hand, yes, I can definitely see that. This book was very much came out of commercial realities for the Nintendo Corporation, and it also managed to be a really solid comic that actually managed to do a lot of really interesting visual things that demonstrate a concern and craft when it comes to the medium of comics. Again, because it's based off of a video game, it's easy to forget just how beautiful, or possibly it's really easy to ignore the existence of this book. But people who appreciate comics as an art form really should take the time and energy to tackle Legend of Zelda: A Link to the Past, because there's so much going on in this book visually that is just absolutely stunning. It is an amazing work of fantasy art. It is an amazing work of comics. And if you like comics, if you like Legend of Zelda, if you just like reading, period, you really ought to take a chance on this book. I can't recommend it enough. All right, I think I'll call it a day there. Wow, thank you so much for watching. I tremendously appreciate it. As always, please like, share, and subscribe, all that claptrap. It lets me know that you're liking these videos, that you want to see more. It lets YouTube know that you like these videos and we want to see more, which maybe gets me monetized at some point, assuming I don't do more, adult-restricted videos, but that's probably not going to happen. Anyway, though, also please don't forget, there is a Patreon for this series now. It's in my link tree in the description section below. Seriously, $1 a month. $1 if you like this video, if you like these videos, if you like this channel, or if you just think I'm funny and want to keep laughing at me because you've got nothing else going on. No judgment. Now, when it comes to Legend of Zelda: A Link to the Past, again, this is Viz Media. They put out a lot of comics, and I mean like a lot of comics, specifically manga comics. So, tracking down a copy of Legend of Zelda: A Link to the Past, I really don't think is going to be that difficult. As always, check out your local comic book shop first, because your local comic book shop needs your love. See if they've got a copy of it, or maybe if you can get lucky, they might have some old issues of Nintendo Power that just might have a couple of, episodes from this particular series. And if they don't, just ask them at the desk, see if they can potentially order you some of these books. I guarantee you most of them will probably be happy to help you out. And hey, as I'm fond of reminding you, also don't forget you live in a world with public libraries. So, go to your local public library, see if they've got a comics or graphic novel selection, and if they don't, if they do and they don't have this one, just ask for an interlibrary loan form, and I guarantee you they'd be happy to help you out. And, as always, thank you all so very, very much for watching. I tremendously appreciate it. Go read some comics.